Welcome back to Dawn of Man HP, the town of Inception, hovering at around 50 in fall of the 36th year, less than 3 years into the Neolithic era, and we have a logs issue. We're trying to convert all of our tents over to the new and improved huts, but we don't have enough logs to do it very quickly. So, in addressing that situation, a new type of work area. Not new type available, but a new type in terms of using. Tree cutting work areas, and I've got one over here with a couple people working it, and also one over here. So you can see a couple of these trees marked for it. That should help. And by the way, I don't think I've ever quite addressed the fact that I don't use the hunting. There we go. There's the hunting work area that you can use. And the reason I don't like that is it seems to me the timing of when you need skins, it's more important for me to just go and manually grab them. They'll hunt any sort of decent targets. In other words, they won't hunt big predators that come into the area. You can do it. I just don't think it's particularly useful for decent gameplay. So that's going on. And I also forgot to mention in the last session that the new storage huts of the thatch style actually have a 50% storage increase. They get 18 instead of 12 stacks of resources that you can put in them for the same footprint. So that is a nice little addition as we move forward. Inception Valley as viewed from the river. And even though you can see our watchtowers sticking up various places, overall the natural plant life dominates the landscape more than does what we've built. Spoiler alert, this will not last long. We are building our palisade up here, the very beginnings of it. And you can see they're just grabbing one log for each of these sections. And if you look at it from this angle, it looks like this is actually pulling towards us from the line, but they are even. It's an optical illusion from the way the game is rendered. If you turn to the side, you can see it is straight. Now, the way that we put these down, I'm just going to do a little demonstration over here of this. Need a nice open area so we can see. And it's much like the fields where you just carve out a square or whatever you want to build. You just throw in a direction. Now, you can go just straight, or you can go to the side, and if we hold it like this, the keys to change the shape, well, they just toggle whether or not you're going to go left to right first or up and down first as you place what you want to do there. And of course, this just means we're going to need all that much more lumber to get this done. Another spring has arrived, and with it we have enough knowledge to unlock something new. We're going to visit the animal kingdom and begin doing some purposeful and intentional domestication, starting with goats. More animals will come. Now, unlike dogs, they have to be taken care of. They don't just sort of hand wave me away. They're gathering of resources and food. And then also, they're not going to domesticate themselves. We have to get them. We could trade for them, but that's not what we're doing here. So let's go take a look around and see what we can find. That's just grass. Not a lot off that way. We have, well, back over here. Those are mouflon. Similar but different species. Donkey. And more donkey. Horses. Boar. Let's get rid of that cave lion. Here we go. That's what we're looking for. We have one young male and one young female, which is convenient because that's the minimum necessary to breed. I'll be on the watch out for more, but now that we're going to actually be able to get a couple, let's begin setting up their place to stay. Residence for non-humans, stable. And let's see, let's put it about there. And there's room over here, but another reason why I want to put it in this general area is this hill ridgeline is, of course, where the cave lions hung out in the early generations of Inception, threatening our very existence repeatedly. And so I think there's a bit of symmetry, yay, more knowledge, in reclaiming that area for use of our own domesticated animals a long time later. And what are goats even good for? Well, they do provide milk, the females obviously, so we can milk them as a resource, which is actually a food, not a beverage. It addresses hunger, not thirst. And I think it would have been interesting if they gave it a little bit of each, but that's not the way it's set up. And then, of course, if you have enough of them, you can slaughter some of them, get bones and skins and meat out of them, as opposed to having to go with the danger and extra time and work of going on a hunting trip. And historically, as best we can determine, it appears that the earliest goat domestication we're aware of happened in Iran and Turkey, modern day anyway, from around 8 to 9,000 BC. So early in the agricultural era. And, of course, they used them for much the same purposes as we've described. We've got our stables going up here now, the familiar thatch construction pattern. And they have the 3 entryways here, and it's actually kind of interesting because people will walk through the stables from one end to the other on their way to doing other jobs. So sometimes you think they're going in there to do work, but they're actually not. That's kind of a interesting little thing that happens. So building up the outside here. It's a fairly lengthy process to build this structure, and then we've got this even little fence surrounding it. But there we go. There is our first stables. And so we have taken one step closer to a fully functioning agricultural society. Our first small step into goat domestication. Now, it's going to take a while for them to be fully productive. You got to breed, you got to build up your numbers. They have to become older adults before you can even get any milk out of them or do that breeding. But one step at a time, and we will work on gradually growing that endeavor. So a few more things to notice here in the fall. We used to have flint here, that's expired, so we've moved off to this area and cleared out more territory by our farms. And then over here with the palisade, it's starting to take shape around this end, and we have our first gate, which placing those is just a matter of lining them up with the rest. And they operate by magic. Perhaps our citizens know how to use the force, because if you just want to close them, you just hit the button. There doesn't have to be anybody within 20 miles of it. Just happens on its own. Now, I do kind of wish they made somebody run over there and operate it, but nonetheless, it is what it is. And then we are building another stable. Right there. We're going to need more. If we look at the inside of this first one, there's 10 locations for animals. 10 per building. And then this is where they put the food. Got this to feed or not feed the animals, unless you're really short on resources. I don't think you'd ever want to not feed them. Yay! And then we've got our limits. Got them all set 25% for now. We'll adjust that perhaps as time goes by. But this will make sure we have plenty of space for the time being. Our first winter with the stable has arrived. The rest of the year, it basically doesn't do anything. It just sits there. But in the winter, all of the goats will collect inside of it. And you see that icon appears? That means somebody is hungry or thirsty, or some animal is hungry or thirsty. And they don't have what they need, so that's their official complaint about it. And they'll come and drop off water, and then it will disappear. But now the icon disappeared. Oh, now it's back. And this sort of yo-yo will do for a while as we build up this other stable, until they get enough in here to satisfy the initial rush of need at the beginning of the winter. And once they're fully satisfied, we'll start to see things like this. The straw begins to pile up. Of course, those two are close to decay, as are a lot of our resources, because we have a definite surplus of straw. But now it builds up to 3 of each. And that's when everything's pretty much stable. They'll have to bring in a bit occasionally throughout the winter as they eat and drink more. But they are well cared for. They'll remain healthy through the winter and come back on the other side of it, ready to continue living a prosperous life. time to do some milking. You can see the milk almost up to 100%. You can turn it off here, but otherwise it runs automatically. Wait for it to fill up completely. There it is. And then you get your symbol icon saying we need to come over here and milk. And then somebody will come along. I've got a hunting party going out. We still have the occasional bit of hunting that we do, not as much as before. But naturally, this goat's going to run away and not make it as easy for us to get this done. But it looks like we now have somebody over here. Indeed we do. Amen. Doing some milking there. That'll reset that milk bar. And now we've eliminated some aurochs. Here's another one. We have actually not needed as many skins as before by a larger margin than I thought once we started getting some of these tents converted to huts. That has really reduced what we need, and so the hunting is not as significant. I do 1 or 2 mid-sized hunting parties a year, and that's pretty much it. Let's see if we can find our goat. There we go. We can see back to 2%. It'll fill back up again, milk again. And so it's a very much a hands-off process that you really don't have to interact much with. Well, it hasn't been long at all since we set up these tree cutting areas, and you can see this one is pretty much gone. I'm doing some extra cutting down along this area. The one on the other side, yep, that's pretty much been hit too. And just the ravenous need for wood. So as we continue to expand our wall here, you can see we've got the gates around. We've circled, maybe 1/3 to a half area. Another gate over here. I've even had to take down a few things in this direction. There was I think an extra hut over here that, just taking that down. Had to move one of the mortars, etc. just to get everything out of the way so we can fit this palisade in between the town and this impassable hill here. It can't go up the hillside, it's too steep. But the requirements for lumber are just really extensive, so we are just plowing through the trees. And now you can just really see sort of the impact of civilization on the land. Took about 1.5 years this time, but in the fall we're ready for a new technology. And we're going to switch gears for a little bit here and go with Megalithism. And megaliths involve quite a bit of work. We've got this resource here. You can see there's others, various places here, here, here. We're going to just focus on the one that's right inside our borders. And there's a couple steps here. One, you just have to mine it. So we've got to wait for somebody to come over there with a pick and grab it. But this is, of course, unlocking our ability to build major structures. And some of them serve different purposes. There's a spiritual purpose, morale purpose, and our totems, we could build more of them, but with the amount of violence that we're having, with the extra work that is required for farming and carrying all the logs, we're starting to see our morale suffer a bit. It's not going down, it varies between like 75 and 90 instead of between 90 and 100, so it's not terrible by any stretch. But it is something that I do want to keep an eye on. And so we could use another structure for that. But then this is going to be much more wide-ranging in terms of the impact. We're basically just going to build really, really big structures. Oh, we're fighting bears. There's a group of cave bears over here. But we seem to be doing all right. There's a big variety of very large structures that we can build out of these exceptionally large rocks. And here we go. We have a dog that has been, a couple of our dogs that have been lost, but they served us well. And we're still waiting for somebody to work their way over here. Assuming that'll happen soon. We are working on this, and they have, one of the cave bears escaped. So that hunt didn't go perfectly, but it still was useful in warding off the predators. I'm hunting for that reason as much as any other these days. I thought I would have somebody over here by now. You can see we're working on this wall, and I think at this point what I want to do is I want to just extend this straight out here. I thought about moving it around this way, but I don't think it's worth the effort. So we're just going to extend this straight out over here to the river. And then on this side, we have it coming up over here. So we've still got quite a bit more ways to work our way down. But I do eventually want to work it all the way down to the river itself, but have a wider area down there. And I think we're well on our way to doing that. And another hut. Yay. But still nobody wants to come mine this. And our workload isn't that high. There we go. Okay, now they finished it. So after they're done, then it turns into this, and it's ready for you to make work with it. But you can't just haul it off. You actually have to build sort of a structure around it. So now we're going to work on that. And it requires 3 logs and 3 leather. Now it appears that we have that, so if we can get them to haul it over here, we'll be just fine. Okay, they've brought a couple leather, and if we zoom in here, let's get up to a little bit better angle. You can see they're just dropping the resources by it. And how are we doing? Everybody's hurrying around. We've got some goats that were born, so that is a thing that is happening, thankfully. We are getting some breeding done. Bringing over more materials. But still not quite enough yet. So as soon as they get the rest of the logs over here, we'll be able to see this in action. But I actually don't have to wait that long to decide where we're going to do it. So we have multiple things. Let's just explore what we can do with this. Under the funerals, we've got this thing called the Dolmen, and that requires 3 of these. But that's our next generation place to bury people. We will get to that. But before that, we want to go to the spiritual element. There's a couple things. We have Stone Circle, which is very much a copy of Stonehenge. We're not going to use that right now. What we're going to do is build the men here. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. But I want to build, and they come in slightly different shapes. I want to build 3 of them, but I'm going to start right here with just this one. Because we have, 3 totems, and 3 of those as taking the next step would seem to be useful. And we are still waiting for something. Yep, 1 more log needs to get hauled over here. They have several. Maybe this is the one? It is. There we go. Okay, so now they're going to construct sort of this transport. And the idea is, they've got these rolling logs underneath. They've got this whole structure. There we go. And now they're going to try, and I'm going to max out the speed here, because they're going to try to move it. And you can have up to 4 people that grab it and move it. And there we go. And so if you just think about this, another knowledge point there, this is at 4 times speed. If you have 1 person trying to pull and haul this thing, it is really slow, especially if you were to do normal speed. This takes a while to get these things, as you might imagine. I mean, it's a massive, massive thing. Okay, now we are constructing the men here. And they're building this framework around it, and they've got it tied up with ropes. And I think it's kind of interesting how they do this. And there we go. So now we have this thing sticking up out of the ground. And one of the things that they've changed since the early versions of the game is that you can have, I think, 2 different people can worship at these structures. It used to be only 1 for all of the totems and skull poles and everything. But the Megalith structures, you can actually have 2 people worship at the same time. You see, we're already starting away. And this should really help. There we go. There's a second one. Should really help our morale boost as we get more and more of these up. So what we want to do is, for the next 2, I want to grab a couple more. And we have some that aren't that far away. So we'll work on mining these and bringing them in. And so since we didn't have enough to do with putting up all of our walls and our gates and chopping down the forest and trying to convert our entire society to thatched huts And let's see, what else are we doing? Keeping the agricultural economy going and working on breeding animals. And now we have another mega project, literally, that we're working on doing. Inception citizens are not bored right now. That leads into our historical sidebar for the episode, and it's one that definitely raises some questions. As is the pattern with many inventions, there was an evolution over time in methods for transporting large, awkward, or heavy objects, beginning with simple sledges, as we've had around for quite a while, and then more rounded supports on the bottom of them to better facilitate distributing the weight and reducing friction, which is, of course, the benefit of that type of construction. And then, of course, getting ahead of where we are now, the invention of the wheel and various carts and chariots being deployed. But as it relates to the familiar monuments that we all know from the ancient world, among them Stonehenge and the many structures in Egypt, obelisks and the pyramids and the Sphinx. And I don't want to get into the debate about exactly how the pyramids were built, but I think it's very much worth asking why build these things in the first place. They aren't necessary in a survival sense. It doesn't have an obvious practical impact on the daily needs of the people. And the effort involved is immense. It's dangerous. It's very difficult. So why would we have done these things? And you can see them all over the world, on every continent. So it's not as if one group did this and the rest of independently developing cultures said, you know, we're not going to bother. And whatever else it may mean, there's definitely the emergence here of, perhaps you could call it a social consciousness beyond the individual or the individual's immediate family, broader and more complex social structures emerging, the sense of being part of a larger political entity. A significant amount of it is religious or spiritual in nature, building various structures as monuments or shrines or acts of worship to a deity. And again, there's the sense of transformation over time. At Stonehenge, for example, we believe that the monument was modified over a period of at least 1,000 years, and possibly longer for various purposes. One of the reasons why it's so popular as a subject of discussion is we don't have a clear consensus on the purpose. There are a lot of theories, but none that come close to being conclusive. I do think we can derive from this, though, conclusions about basic curiosity, ambition, willingness to sacrifice under certain conditions that is really essential to humanity eventually progressing further and further up the ladder of knowledge, if you will. If we were not as a species inherently willing at some level to take risks in investigating the unknown, many of the achievements in later periods of exploration and discovery would very likely not have happened. And perhaps it might be worth considering even in modern times that it may not always be the best thing to be purely practical about some aspects of life. There's an element of growth and constantly striving for improvement that perhaps requires taking calculated risks, even when the end result may not be abundantly clear. So when next we return, Inception will work on progressing the many projects now underway. Till then, thanks for watching, everybody. Dawn of Man will continue soon.